Hello, I'm Allan Lee and welcome to NZONE Focus and our series of interviews with the leaders of the main political parties as they head into the general election, now just 2 weeks away. Joining me in the studio this week is Labour leader Phil Goff. Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
So it's a pleasure, Allan. Nice to be here.
You've got loads of experience. You know, you've been in opposition, you've been in government, you're a party leader. But if there is a comment that people say about you on a regular basis is that you're too nice a bloke for politics.
Oh, they haven't seen my hard side. Give me a chance. No, look, nothing wrong with being pleasant to people. That's what we expect of human beings. You've got to have a core of steel, though, to make the hard decisions when you need to make them. And I've made a few in my time. I've been a minister for 15 years. When you've got to make the hard decision, you make the hard decision, but you try to be fair, and you don't go out of your way simply to be unpleasant to people. We can do without that in politics.
The National's been doing extraordinarily well in the polls. Do you reach a stage where you think, look, this time we're just not going to get any traction at all, or is all hope not lost?
Oh no, look, you go out to win. And you go out, I'm an optimist. I was a Minister of Trade in New Zealand for years, and fighting for those trade deals, you had to be a professional optimist. But I think that the sort of things that we're talking about, in terms of our values and our policies, puts us alongside New Zealanders. So I'm confident that when people go into that polling booth, they think about the future they want for their country and their children, and what each party is offering, then there'll be a lot of support for Labour.
Let's talk about some of the policies and some of the issues that face our nation. Now, research seems to show that the traditional family unit of a mum and a dad and kids is the most successful way to raise children. How can we make a better effort to support the traditional family?
Well, there's unfortunately a lot of traditional families that don't give their kids a good start, where kids are abused and neglected, some 21,000 a year in New Zealand. And I find that quite appalling. It's not new, and maybe it's that we bring it out into the open more, but children starting off their lives abused and neglected, getting a rotten start in life, the human costs for them, but the social costs for all of us are huge. And I think, you know, certainly we need better parenting. We need people to understand how to form a decent relationship with tolerance and mutual respect. We need to take some of the pressures off the day-to-day lives of people. When people are struggling to make ends meet, sometimes the pressure does boil over, and that's reflected in the poor quality of human life.
I mean, Labour's been accused in the past of a bit of social engineering in terms of, I suppose, civil unions, making it easier for single-parent families to exist. Is that part of the problem? Have we weakened the family unit so that it does have those problems?
No, I don't think that's part of the problem, because what we're interested is in relationships where people show respect towards each other and where they show care, love and give stability to their children. That's the bottom line. My wife comes from a single parent family before there was support. She understands, and I understand through her, the hardship that children went through in that situation, where mum relied on whether dad was ever going to make that payment and support. So I've got no regrets about giving families the financial support they need to give their kids the best start possible in life. I'm fortunate in my family. I've been going out with my wife for 40 years. We were both children, I should say, at the time. And it's been a relationship that's been sustained, and we've given that stable and loving environment to bring up our kids. Didn't mean to say that our kids in their teenage years didn't do what teenagers too often do, but it did mean that they got a good start. And what we should be trying to do as a community is to ensure that every child gets that start. That should be the birthright of New Zealand children.
Oh, you mentioned child abuse, and obviously there's been the anti-smacking legislation. But although that's come in, it doesn't seem to have reduced the more horrific cases at all.
No, and I don't think it was going to do that. Look, you know, like other parents, I've at times smacked my children. Sometimes out of anger, which is wrong, really. Sometimes to relieve my frustrations, and you know, afterwards you wished you hadn't. There was a better way of doing it. I think families and children need discipline. I think there's a better way of applying discipline than whacking them. But what we're talking about here is not the issue of lightly smacking a child. We're talking about genuine cases where children are abused and neglected. And that's what we need to focus on. We've had a lot of debate about smacking. If only we had the same level of debate about families in which children are terribly abused and the need for our community to have mechanisms to intervene right at the start of those children's lives. And when I say right at the start, you know, I've dealt with families in my electorate where they've adopted children and the children suffer from fetal alcohol syndrome. And I've seen the pain and the trials that those families have gone through. No mother, no parent has the right to bring a child into the world that is suffering from their taking drugs and alcohol during that pregnancy. And we've got to deal with those problems, and we've got to deal with the problems as early as we can to prevent the damage, to prevent the suffering, to prevent the costs.
Let's talk a bit about the whole liquor business. We've had the liquor reform laws which have come through in the last few weeks. Is that going to solve problems like fetal alcohol syndrome and the binge drinking
Not by
culture?
itself, and sadly, I don't think that the Royal Commission's findings on fetal alcohol have been taken up strongly enough by the government and by Parliament. I think, frankly, my personal view is that we needed to take the laws further, that we should have debated fully what the Royal Commission, or the Law Commission, I should say, rather than Royal Commission, advocated. And, you know, there are some good things in there that actually Labor introduced the legislation saying communities should have more power over just how many liquor outlets we've got in the community. Mount Roskill, my own electorate, was traditionally dry. Now there's a liquor store on every corner.
Would you raise the drinking age?
Yeah, I will support the lifting of the drinking age off licence to 20. I'm thinking about on licence at 18, and I'll tell you why. Not that I think it's a great idea that people are drinking, but if I think back, and I'm honest with myself and with you, to my own youth, you know, somebody would buy a dozen beer and would take it down the reserve. Actually, I'd rather see people drinking under circumstances where there is supervision and control in a better environment than that. But what we've got to do is deal with teenage binge drinking. That really worries me. But we don't put it all on the children. You know, where do the children get their role model from? They get it from the society that they grow up in, and too many adults who right through their life never know that what they should be doing in terms of not losing control of themselves because they've drunk too much. We shouldn't laugh about drunkenness. We should say that's demeaning, that's stupid, and people, yeah, enjoy your drink. I enjoy my drink, but don't get drunk, don't lose control, don't make a fool of yourself, don't put others at risk.
There would be people who would say, though, that by putting a responsibility on adults, it's nanny state who's stepping in and stopping their enjoyment.
Well, you know, whether you say the term nanny state depends on whether you agree with what's being done. I remember people saying when we brought in the smoke-free environments bill that it was nanny state. I reckon if I went out and talked to our audience now, 80% of people would say, very good piece of legislation. I can go along to a restaurant now or a cafe and I can have a meal or I can have a coffee and not breathe in somebody's second-hand smoke. So the world does move on, and we change our definition of what role the state should play. I think I've seen a fair amount of nanny state from the National Party and government too.
Let's talk a bit about the economy, because obviously with what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen some really difficult times. Let's start with young people, since we're talking about them. Desperate shortage of jobs for young people. I saw a figure that 20% of people between 15 and 24 don't have a job. How do we solve that?
Well, we've come out with a number of ideas about this. We do have 24,000 young people that's under the age of 20 that are not in employment, education or training. A lot of them leave school at 16, they disappear, and they turn up at 18 to apply for the dole. That's disaster. You know, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. In Christchurch, for example, 49% of the Pacific Island community there, teenagers, are not in employment, education or training. What would we do? First of all, better school to work transition. Dale Williams, the Mayor of Otrahonga, is doing this brilliantly. No child leaves school without having somewhere to go to. They have to have a place in education or training or work. And they're mentored and they're supported. And that makes sense. He's doing it. We should apply that across the board. But secondly, why pay the unemployment benefit to an 18 and 19-year-old? What Labor has said, let's give that unemployment benefit to an employer who undertakes to provide a full-time apprenticeship for that young man or young woman. I'd rather pay that $167 a week to the employer and have that young person paid the training rate and given a chance for the future, learning the skills they need and not losing hope, not losing aspiration, not losing motivation. So our focus is first and foremost on the young people, and we will do that. It'll cost $87 million, but it'll be the best $87 million of your money that I could possibly invest. Put people into a trade where they can learn a skill that will last them a lifetime, be proud of what they can achieve. You'll see an amazing transformation of that young person.
Let's take a break there and we'll come back in a couple of minutes. Well, welcome back to NZONE Focus, our interview with Labour leader Phil Goff. I was talking to the Greens leader, Materia Toure, a few weeks ago. One of the things that she pointed out which really struck a chord with me was that there is a widening gap between our country's richest and our country's poorest. How do we solve that?
It means that we have to have ways of lifting up people at the bottom, giving them opportunity. I mean, I think New Zealand has changed over my lifetime. I'm a baby boomer. When my dad came back from the war, all of us as New Zealanders, well, I was too young to think about it, but the adults said, well, look, it didn't matter whether you're a lawyer or a labourer. You went away, you served your country, and when you come back, we should treat you as fairly as possible. And New Zealand should be a place where everybody can do as well as they can. I think the dollar has taken over, and I'm dealing with people in my own electorate, and I'm seeing people around the country that aren't getting a living wage. They're trying to raise a family on $13 an hour, and you can't do that. The government, God bless them, gave me $300 a week in tax cuts and Mr Key $1,000 a week in tax cuts. I'm sorry, we weren't the priority. The people that are struggling to put food on the table for their children, to get their children well clothed, to get them the health care they need a helping hand. And what we've said about taxation is, first of all, it's going to be fairer. The tax cuts will come from the bottom up. The first $5,000 tax-free, taking the GST off fresh fruit and vegetables so people can afford healthy choices for their children. That makes sense. Lifting the minimum wage. We need to have access to decent health care. We need an education system that says it doesn't matter what wealth your family has, you're going to have the best chance we can give you to achieve to your full potential. The family needs that, but so does the whole of our community. Because it's in our interest, every one of us, that every child should be able to be everything that they're capable of being.
Capital gains tax, you're talking about reintroducing it.
Introducing one, we've never had one.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
You
had one in England, that's what you're thinking about.
We had one, yes. Yeah. And it wasn't very popular, and yet there weren't howls of outrage when you talked about introducing it. Were you surprised?
No, though it was, when we polled, people said, does anybody want a new tax? No, they never do. But why does every developed country in the world, I think except from Switzerland and Turkey, have a capital gains tax? Because it's fair. You and I, we're wage and salary earners. We go along, we pay a tax on every dollar we earn. We've got a bit of money in the bank. We pay tax on every dollar in interest we earn. But if I sell off one of my investment properties and I make $400,000 net profit, I pay no tax on it. Sam Morgan, he's big game, I'm little game. He made $700 million and he said it's wrong that I paid no tax at all on that $700 million. And we're saying, look, it won't be retrospective, but 15% on a capital gain, it's not a high rate of tax, it's not draconian, but everybody should pay their share. And there's another reason for that. If we all go along and we invest in rental properties, we force the price of house prices way up. And what we need to be doing is creating a level playing field. So we're encouraging people to invest in the productive sector that creates real jobs, real growth, not simply inflation that we benefit from because we're speculating on a piece of property or a share.
Now, when you were Minister of Trade, you dealt a lot with free trade agreements. We're currently in the middle of negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. Are the free trade agreements all they're cracked up to be?
Well, the China Free Trade Agreement has certainly been of benefit to New Zealand. We've lifted our exports to China. by over $1.5 billion a year. We've narrowed the gap now. Chinese used to send far more to us than we sent to them. That gap is narrowing. We can sell our kiwi fruit, we can sell our dairy product, we can sell our wool and our meat without trade barriers. That's been hugely beneficial to New Zealand and the free trade agreement with ASEAN. I started off the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but I tell you what, I've learnt this from trade negotiations. You don't go in there giving everything away from your side to get too little in return. So there are some bottom lines that I would urge the government to follow. We should never trade off Pharmac. Why should we give way to the big boys in the pharmaceutical companies because we purchase collectively in New Zealand to get the best price for our health system? We should just have that as a bottom line. And nor should we give way on things like if the multinational companies want to tell us that we can't have plain packages for cigarettes. That's not their business, that's our business. We'll make that decision, and that wouldn't be part of any free trade agreement that I'd be prepared to negotiate.
So that's a case of make sure that it's not a one-way
road.
No,
the free trade agreement has to be of benefit to New Zealand and New Zealanders. And there are certain bottom lines. Everybody will try you on. You've got to hang in there. You've got to be tough in your negotiation. And we were with China. They were tough people to negotiate with. There was I representing my 4.3 million New Zealanders, and Bo Xilai on the other side representing his 1.3 billion. And he was saying, we're worried about your very powerful dairy industry. And I'm saying, Minister, where do you think the power balance lies here? Be reasonable. No, you've got to negotiate in a tough manner. But free trade, will it help if we can get our goods and our services into other countries, particularly like China, fastest growing economy in the world? You bet your life it helped. It's been great for New Zealand.
Let's talk about SOEs, because that's something that the government is looking at, if not selling off bits of. That, bearing in mind that SOEs were actually introduced by a Labour government, I guess that you'd probably be keen to keep them within government control.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we did the right thing in turning some of the old government departments that were frankly hopelessly inefficient into state-owned enterprises that ran along commercial lines, including the railways. But the mistake that I think that Labor government in the 80s made, and then National made again in the 90s and is making now, is to say we're going to flog these off. Because we know what happens when you flog them off. Foreign companies get to own and control them. Contact Energy, Bill English sold in 1999, $100 million a year in dividends flow out of New Zealand and into Australia. We want to own our own future. We want to keep those assets community owned and New Zealand owned. The assets they're putting on the block in the last year returned $900 million in dividends to you, to me, and to every one of our viewers because they're Kiwi taxpayers. And that money is spent on services, it offsets the need for taxation. Why would you give away your most efficient and productive enterprises that were of huge benefit to New Zealanders as taxpayers and also as consumers? You know, as soon as you sell the power companies, the private shareholders want to up the profit margins and your power prices are going to go up, and they're already too high.
But I guess the government, you can see their point of view in that they're facing an economy around the world which you could say has tanked in lots of places. They must feel that they need to take some startling steps to try and save us.
This is all ideological. They were talking about selling the assets long before there was a debt problem, and let's get that debt problem in perspective. If you sell all the assets off, yeah, it'll pay the debt off for 6 months, but then you've lost the assets and you've lost them forever, and you've lost the dividend stream that go with them. Far better to have a capital gains tax that broadens the tax base, that's ongoing, that enables us to pay down our debt, keep our assets, and to give the tax cuts that we'd like to give from the bottom up, first $5,000 of your income tax-free. That's a fairer system, a better system, and actually in polling people have indicated that's what they prefer.
The emissions trading scheme is something that upsets a lot of people. A lot of businesses feel that the scheme is costing them money, but all you need is a volcano to go off on the other side of the world and all the carbon credits that we may have saved are blown out of the water straight away. So I can see their point. What is the point?
Well, we can't do anything about the volcano on the other side of the world, but we can do something about the man-made factor of pushing up the global warming gases. Recently we had a Pacific Island Forum in New Zealand, and the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, came here, and he said to me that is the most pressing problem for the world. You know, we don't own this world. It belongs to those that come after us. We owe it to your grandchildren and your children, my children and grandchildren, that we leave the world in a better place environmentally, and that means not raising the warming gases to a level where the sea level rises, we have more floods, we have more droughts. We've got to be responsible about our future and take control of the things that we can control.
Our time's nearly out, but I have a few more things I want to try and squeeze in if we can.
Right.
Let's talk a bit about the justice system, because there is this constant tension between restorative justice and punitive justice. Do we put people in prison to punish them, or do we put them in prison to restore them back to society? Is there a Labour position on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was Minister of Justice for 6 years, so I've thought a lot about it. First of all, you put people in prison where the community needs to be protected from those people. I've been through A, B, C and D block at Paremaremo. I've seen people there that I would never want released into the community. But take the broader view. We want to, if we've got somebody in prison that can be changed, we want to change them. We want to give them the skills they need to come back into the community and keep out of trouble. And actually, we need the fence at the top of the cliff. Let's look at the things: drugs, alcohol, illiteracy, unemployment, all of those things, and mental illness. They all contribute to the crime rate. Far better if we act, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they used to say when we had ounces and pounds. I think we've got to be positive and constructive in keeping our community safe.
Would you say that for instance, units like the faith-based unit at Rumataka, which seems to have remarkable results, would you say that schemes that are maybe outside the square would get your support?
Oh, look, I would use... look, my ideology is this: if it works, let's do it. If it doesn't work but it sounds good politically, forget it, because you're just conning the public. And we've seen that with boot camps. They haven't worked. Te Hurihanga that I set up, dealing with 14 to 17-year-olds that were on the path to jail, an 82% success rate in dropping reoffending, and the government scrapped it because they said it was too expensive. My guess is a lot of those young men that would otherwise have gone through that program are now in jail, costing us $100,000 a year. And jail won't make them better. This program turned their lives around. Let's do the things that are sensible. Let's not play politics with it.
We've got a referendum on MMP coming up. Are you happy to stick with MMP, or would you prefer to go back to something like first past the post?
My personal preference is for MMP, and it's because of this. If you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the seats in Parliament. I can't think of a fairer system. If you're a New Zealander, it doesn't matter whether you live in a Labour seat or a National seat or any other seat, your vote still counts equally and the same, because it goes towards the proportional representation in Parliament. Look, I'd do away with this business of coattailing others in Parliament. John Banks gets elected in Epsom. He brings in 4 other members of Parliament that nobody wanted in Parliament. That's a rort on the system. That should change. But I'd keep MMP and I'd reform it to make it better.
So in the event of a coalition being formed, who could you work with? Or perhaps more interestingly, who couldn't you work with?
I'd have trouble working with Hone Harawira because his outlook on life is totally different from mine, and I don't think he'd be a reliable partner. Dr. Brash I'd have trouble working with. He has a totally different philosophy about life. I don't believe in trickle down. I believe in giving people fair opportunity. It doesn't make sense for the 2 major parties to be in coalition, though there's no reason why the 2 major parties shouldn't work together where it's sensible to do so. So, you know, I guess I'd be looking at the Greens as a potential coalition partner, but we'd have to have that negotiation after the election, and we'd have to look at the common ground. And our bottom line is, you know, you need to agree to things that will be good for all New Zealanders, not just some.
It's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Allan. It's a pleasure.
And that brings our programme to a close. We look forward to seeing you again next week. We were hoping to be joined by the Prime Minister, but sadly he's unavailable. Thank you for joining us. Bye for now.